The first gunshot made her flinch. Everyone saw it, everyone remembered it. Everyone used it against her for exactly 6 days. Then the second gunshot came, and while every trained professional in that hospital ran for the exits, the nervous new hire ran the other way, straight into the sound nobody else could stand to face. By the end of that night, nobody would ever call her nervous again. Hey everyone, welcome back to Nurse Files, the channel where the quietest people in the room turn out to be the strongest. If you're new here, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's get into tonight's story. Maya Bristow started at Larkspur County Hospital on a Monday, and by Wednesday, everyone had already decided who she was. She was 29, small-framed, soft-spoken, with a habit of keeping her eyes down in hallways and her sleeves pulled long over her wrists, even in the summer heat. She startled at loud noises. She flinched at the crash cart when it rolled too fast across tile. On her second shift, a tray of surgical instruments had clattered to the floor, and Maya had gone rigid for a full 3 seconds before anyone else even looked up. Nurse Denise Calhoun, who had run the ER floor for 11 years and considered herself its unofficial gatekeeper, noticed everything. And she never let anything unspoken. "You good, sweetheart?" Denise asked, not unkindly, but not kindly either, the tone of someone testing for weakness and finding it faster than expected. "You jump like you've never heard a tray drop before." "I'm fine," Maya said quietly. "Just tired." Denise didn't believe her, and made sure everyone else didn't either. By Thursday, the story had grown legs. Maya was the jumpy one. Maya was not cut out for trauma. Dr. Adrian Cole, the ER's lead physician, younger than most but twice as convinced of his own competence, made his opinion clear during a morning huddle. "I need people who can hold steady under pressure," he said, not looking directly at Maya but making sure she was in the room to hear it. "Not people who need to be walked through every startle reflex like it's their first day at a petting zoo." A few nurses laughed. Maya kept her eyes on her clipboard. "With respect, doctor," she said quietly, "everyone reacts differently to sudden stimuli. It means that in a real emergency, I need to know the person next to me isn't going to freeze." Maya didn't argue further. She simply nodded, the way someone nods when they've decided a fight isn't worth having yet. That quiet only fed the assumption. By Friday, Denise had taken to assigning Maya the lowest stakes tasks available: restocking gauze, walking discharged patients to their cars, answering the phones at the desk instead of working the floor. "It's for her own good," Denise told Torres, one of the younger nurses, without lowering her voice enough. "Some people just aren't built for this. Better she finds that out on paperwork duty than on a real trauma." Torres, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. "She seems capable, though, just quiet." Quiet and capable aren't the same as steady. I've seen plenty of quiet ones fold the second things get loud. What none of them noticed, because none of them were looking for it, was the way Maya's eyes tracked every exit in every room she entered. The way her hands, when not being watched, moved with an economy of motion that had nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with training so deep that it had become instinct. The way she never once actually made a clinical mistake, despite the flinching, despite the startled shoulders, despite the reputation building around her like a wall she hadn't built herself. She had a small tattoo on the inside of her wrist, always covered by her sleeve, a set of coordinates, faded, that meant nothing to anyone who saw it, because no one ever really looked. On Saturday morning, during the shift handoff, Dr. Cole made the joke that would define the next 6 days. "Bristow, you're on phones and discharge escorts. Again. Let's not put you anywhere near anything that goes bang, huh? Wouldn't want a repeat of the tray incident." The room laughed. Maya's jaw tightened just slightly, in a way nobody caught. "Understood," and she walked to the front desk without another word. Nobody in that hospital knew that the woman they'd nicknamed the Jumpy One had once held a triage line steady under actual gunfire in a place far from Larkspur County, in a life she'd left so thoroughly that even her flinch, the thing they mocked most, was a scar from a memory none of them would have survived themselves. They would find out, just not yet. The call came in at 9:40 that night, a multi-vehicle collision on Route 9, 3 patients, 1 critical. The ER erupted into its usual controlled chaos. Denise took charge of triage assignments, rattling off names like a drill sergeant. "Torres, Bay 1, Calhoun's with me on Bay 2. Cole, you're primary on the critical. And Bristow? Torres asked. Denise glanced toward the desk, where Maya was already standing, having heard the call come through dispatch before anyone announced it aloud. Front desk, family intake. Maya nodded once, moved to position, and then the ambulance doors slammed open and everything about to happen made a mockery of the day's assignment sheet. The critical patient wasn't just critical, he was in traumatic arrest. Chest crushed against a steering column, breath sounds wrong on one side, blood pressure crashing in real time as the paramedics wheeled him in. BP's 62/40 and dropping, the paramedic called. We lost a pulse twice on the way in. Cole moved to the bedside, barking orders, but his hands, Maya noticed instantly, the way she noticed everything, were half a second too slow. His voice pitched a note too high. He was good with charts. He had never actually run a true field trauma alone. I need another set of hands, Cole snapped, scanning the room. Torres and Denise were both buried in their own patients. The junior nurses were green. His eyes landed, reluctantly, on Maya. Bristow, get over here. Don't just stand there. Maya didn't hesitate. She crossed the room in 3 steps, and the moment her hands touched the patient, something in her posture changed. The softness dropped away like a coat shrugged off in warm weather. Left side absent, she said, calmly, stethoscope already at his ribs. This isn't just cardiac. He's got a collapsed lung compressing his heart. That's not confirmed. It doesn't need to be confirmed. It needs to be treated, Maya said, already reaching for a large bore needle from the cart with hands that moved without a single tremor. I need you to hold pressure on his abdomen. Now, please. Cole, startled by the sudden authority in her voice, actually obeyed. She found the space between his ribs by feel, decompressing the chest with a controlled, practiced motion, and the monitor's dying rhythm began, impossibly, to climb back towards something survivable. Sat's climbing, Torres called, from across the room, having glanced over mid-suture, stunned. 71, 78, 84. He needs a chest tube, not just a needle. This buys minutes. Someone get the kit. Denise, hearing the commotion, turned from her own patient just long enough to see Maya's hands moving with a precision that had nothing to do with jumpy or nervous or not cut out for this. Where did you learn that draw technique? Denise asked, slowly, unable to help herself. That's not standard insertion. That's tactical. Nursing school, Maya said simply, not looking up, focused entirely on the rise and fall of the patient's chest. But Denise had a nephew who'd served 2 tours overseas, and something about the calm, the counting by feel instead of by measurement, the total absence of hesitation, nagged at her in a way she couldn't yet name. Then she saw it. As Maya reached for gauze, her sleeve rode up an inch, revealing the edge of that faded coordinate tattoo on her wrist. Denise's eyes lingered there a half-second too long. Maya noticed she was looking. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear. Warning. Bay's getting crowded, Maya said quietly, pulling her sleeve back down. I've got him stable. Go check on your patient. Denise didn't push. Not yet. But something in that room had cracked open. Small, easy to dismiss, and absolutely certain to spread, the way every quiet fracture eventually does. The patient stabilized. The chaos settled into the low hum of recovery, and for 11 minutes, Larkspur County's ER believed the worst of the night was over. They were wrong. At 10:04 p.m., a man walked through the ambulance bay doors that Maya had spent the last 6 days being mocked for flinching near, and this time the sound that followed him was not a dropped tray. It was a gunshot, fired into the ceiling of the waiting room, deliberate and unmistakable. Screaming erupted, patients dropped to the floor, staff scattered toward the back hallways, toward supply closets, toward anywhere that wasn't the line of sight of the man standing in the doorway. Mid-30s, wild-eyed, gun shaking in his grip, shouting for someone named Rosa. Dr. Cole ran. Denise ran. Torres pulled 2 junior nurses bodily into a supply closet and slammed the door. And Maya Bristow, the jumpy one, the one who couldn't handle loud noises, the one nobody trusted near anything that goes bang, did not run. She flinched, just once, just for half a second, the same reflex that had defined her reputation all week. Then she walked straight toward the sound everyone else was fleeing. "Sir," she called out, voice low, steady, hands raised and open, stepping fully into the waiting room where a dozen terrified patients lay frozen on the floor. "My name is Maya. Nobody here wants to hurt you." "Where's Rosa?" the man, later identified as Tomas Reyes, shouted, gun swinging toward a curtained bay. "They said she's back here. They won't let me see her." "I can help you find her," Maya said, taking a slow step forward, deliberately placing herself between his line of sight and the patients on the floor. "You need to lower that first. Not for me, for her. She wouldn't want you to lose everything trying to see her." "You don't understand," Tomas said, voice cracking, tears mixing with the wild fear in his eyes. "She's my wife. They told me she might not make it and nobody will tell me anything, and I understand more than you think," Maya said, and something in her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there all week. "I'm going to walk you to her room myself, but the gun stays here. Can you do that for me?" His hand shook. The gun lowered an inch, then another. Somewhere behind the front desk, Denise had re-emerged just enough to watch through the gap in the doorway, frozen, unable to look away from the woman she had spent a week calling too nervous for real work. "I just want to see my wife," Tomas said, voice breaking completely now. "Then let's go see her," Maya said gently. "Set it down first." The gun clattered to the tile floor. Maya crossed the remaining distance in 3 calm steps, kneeling to slide the weapon safely away before rising and placing a steady hand on Tomas's shoulder. "Let's go. I've got you." Security rounded the corner seconds later, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Maya raised a hand toward them without breaking her focus on Tomas. "He's not a threat anymore. Stand down. I need someone to update him on Rosa Reyes's status now, calmly." They did, because in that hallway, in that moment, there was no question left about who had actually been steady the entire time. 20 minutes later, once Tomas Reyes had been safely escorted to his wife's bedside and security had the weapon secured, Larkspur County's staff slowly re-emerged from closets and back hallways into a waiting room that Maya had single-handedly kept from becoming a tragedy. Denise stood frozen near the desk, staring at her. "How?" she said slowly. "Did you do that? You didn't even hesitate." Before Maya could answer, a voice came from Bay 2, Harold Whittemore, an elderly patient who'd been waiting quietly through the entire ordeal, still hooked to a slow IV drip, staring at Maya with the look of a man watching a memory walk back into the room. Doc Bristow, it's you, isn't it?" Maya went very still. "I'm sorry," Cole said, reappearing from wherever he'd fled, face pale. "You know her?" "Know her?" Whittemore laughed, a wet, disbelieving sound. "She pulled 3 of my unit out of a burning transport outside Kandahar under live fire, hold a collapsing airway open for her own hands for 6 minutes until the medvac broke through. We called her Steady, because nothing ever rattled her. Not gunfire, not screaming, not a damn thing. Last I heard, she'd left the service. Didn't know she'd ended up here." The room went silent. "You're a combat medic," Torres said slowly, the pieces assembling themselves in real time. "This whole week, we thought you were nervous," Maya finished quietly. "I know." "But you flinched," Denise said, almost pleading now, as if the contradiction physically hurt her. "At the tray. At the gunfire tonight, you flinched." "I did. I still do. Every time for half a second. That never goes away, no matter how many times you've been shot at. The flinch isn't the failure. Freezing after it would be. I never froze. I just never told any of you that because for once in my life, I wanted to see if this place would judge me on what I actually did instead of what I looked like doing it." Cole stared at the chart in his hands, the same one he'd nearly mismanaged 40 minutes earlier before Maya overrode his hesitation and saved a man's life. "You should have told us who you were," he said, though the accusation had no force left in it. Would it have mattered? Maya asked quietly. Or would you have just found a different reason to underestimate me? Nobody answered, because everybody in that room already knew the truth. The hospital board called it a review of unauthorized field decision-making. Maya called it what it actually was, an inquiry into whether she'd be punished for saving 2 lives in one night without waiting for permission from people who had spent a week deciding she wasn't capable of doing either. She sat across from Dr. Patricia Alvarez, the hospital's chief of medicine, 3 days later, alongside a hospital attorney glancing repeatedly at his watch. You administered treatment above documented authorization, Alvarez said, reading from a file. And you engaged an armed individual without waiting for security. Regardless of outcome, that represents significant liability exposure. The outcome was 2 people are alive who might not otherwise be, said Maya evenly. That's not the metric we're discussing, Nurse Bristow. With respect, a voice said from the doorway. Dr. Cole stood there, still in scrubs from his shift. Nobody had asked him to attend. I was the physician on record during the trauma. I hesitated. I was slow. If she had waited for my authorization, that patient would have died in the time it took me to catch up to what she already understood. I've reviewed everything 3 times since. There's no version where my judgment outperformed hers. Alvarez's eyebrow lifted. That's a serious statement, doctor. It's an honest one. I spent a week deciding a woman was too nervous for this job because she flinched at a sound. I was wrong, in a way that could have cost lives twice over if she'd been anyone else. Denise, who had asked to be present, spoke next, her voice quieter than usual. I want that on the record too. We built a reputation around her before we ever watched her actually work. That's not a protocol failure, that's a culture failure, and it's ours. The attorney cleared his throat. This doesn't resolve the liability question regarding the armed encounter. Then reframe the question, came another voice from the hallway. Harold Whitmore wheeled himself into view, having insisted on being present. I've spent 30 years around combat medicine. I can tell you precisely what protocol says about a trained medic acting on initiative when the room around her fails to act. It isn't a violation. It's the entire principle the role exists for. She didn't break your rules, ma'am. She followed better ones most people in this building have never had to learn. The room fell quiet. Alvarez closed the file slowly, something in her expression shifting from procedural to something closer to respect. She'll take this under full review, but off the record, thank you for what you did that night. Take your time, Maya said calmly. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in 6 days, she said it like she finally believed it herself. The review might have ended there quietly, if not for what happened 2 weeks later. It began with a name on an intake sheet that made Maya's whole body go cold. Reyes. Not Tomas, his brother Ernesto, brought in with a gunshot wound of his own, muttering through blood loss about finishing what Tomas started and someone owing them answers. What none of the staff initially realized was that Ernesto hadn't come alone. 2 men waited in the parking lot, armed, watching the ambulance bay, convinced the hospital had somehow let their brother's arrest happen weeks earlier. Security caught the first sign of trouble on camera. 2 figures approaching the rear entrance, weapons visible, moving with coordinated intent. Lock down, the security chief called over the radio, voice tight. All non-critical staff to shelter positions, now! Maya was mid-suture on Ernesto's wound when the alert came through, and for the second time in weeks, she watched people around her scattered towards safety, while she stayed rooted at the bedside of a man who moments ago had been threatening the hospital that was currently saving his life. You need to move, Bristow, Torres said, half dragging a wheelchair patient toward a supply closet. They're not messing around out there.
I can't leave him mid-procedure, Maya said, hands steady despite the alarm blaring overhead. But you need to get everyone else clear, now. The rear doors shattered open 40 seconds later. 2 armed men moved into the corridor, shouting for whoever was in charge of what happened to Tomas. Maya stepped into the hallway before security could engage, hands raised, placing herself deliberately in the open space between the men and the trauma bay behind her. My name is Maya, she said, voice carrying the same unshaken calm that had once talked their own brother into laying down a weapon. Ernesto is stable. He's alive because of the people in this building, not despite them. Nobody here hurt Tomas. I'm the one who walked him to Rosa's bedside myself." "You're lying," one of the men snapped, weapon trembling in an unsteady grip. "I'm not," she said, "and I think, somewhere, you already know that. Fear makes people believe the worst version of a story. I've seen it happen more times than I can count, in places far worse than this hallway." "How would you know anything about that?" the second man spat. "Because I spent years pulling people out of exactly this kind of moment. I've talked down men holding worse weapons than these, in places where nobody was coming to help if I got it wrong. I am not afraid of you. I am asking you, one time, to put those down before anyone else gets hurt tonight, including you." The first weapon lowered. Then, reluctantly, the second. Security moved in fast but controlled, weapons trained but restrained, following Maya's steady hand signal not to escalate. "Stand down," she said again, firmly. "It's over." And it was. Both men were taken into custody without a single shot fired. The hospital board, informed within the hour, arrived the next morning to a version of Larkspur County that had changed overnight. Dr. Alvarez stood before the full board and read from a report that had by morning entirely reframed its own language. "Staff Sergeant Maya Bristow, former combat medic, 2 commendations for valor, credited with over a dozen documented field saves prior to honorable discharge. 2 weeks ago, she stabilized a critical trauma patient against physician hesitation and de-escalated an active armed threat without injury. Last night, she is credited with preventing a second armed confrontation from becoming a mass casualty event." She looked up. "This board owes Nurse Bristow a formal apology for 6 days of documented dismissiveness toward a decorated professional, and announces immediate changes to how staff competency is evaluated in this hospital." Dr. Cole requested reassignment that same week, not away from the ER, but into a new training role he insisted on designing himself, built entirely around what he now calls listening before judging. "I have a lot to unlearn," he told Maya privately. "I'd like to learn it properly this time, from you if you'll teach me." "I will, but it starts with actually watching people work before deciding what they're capable of." Denise requested to be permanently paired with Maya's shifts, calling it, quietly, the most honest education she'd had in 11 years of nursing. Harold Whitmore became a regular presence at the hospital, sharing stories that made abstract protocols feel suddenly, achingly real. And Maya Bristow, once mocked as the jumpy one, was offered the position of trauma response lead, a role she accepted only once it came without ceremony, exactly the way she preferred to be recognized. 6 months later, Larkspur County's ER looked much the same on the surface, but something underneath had shifted for good. New hires were trained differently now. Nobody assumed a flinch meant weakness. Nobody handed out the hardest cases as a test designed to make someone fail. Cole ran his new mentorship sessions with a humility that cost him nearly everything to learn. Denise trained incoming nurses with a phrase she now repeated constantly: "Watch what they do, not what they look doing it." And Maya still flinched, sometimes, at loud noises. It was problem everyone thought it was. A flinch is not a failure. It's simply proof that something once cost you everything, and you survived it anyway. The bravest person in the room is rarely the loudest one. Sometimes it's the one everyone assumed would run, right up until the moment they didn't. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just walks quietly towards the sound everyone else is running from. The end. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only.